President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced a commission of inquiry to probe allegations made against top police officials by KZN Police Chief Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. Police Minister Senzo Mchunu has been placed on special leave despite mounting calls for his dismissal. And last week, members of the Portfolio Committees on Police and Justice discussed Parliament's way forward, with several members expressing dissatisfaction with the Commission, saying history has shown their ineffectiveness and that people have lost trust in inquiries. Let's look at the mechanisms of commissions, their cost and binding capabilities now, with Jakkie Cilliers, Head of African Futures at Institute of Security Studies. Jakkie, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation.
Now, firstly, Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi has essentially blown the whistle on what he calls a sophisticated criminal justice, criminal system that has infiltrated our entire law enforcement system, from police to prosecutors to judges. He references the syndicate. What does this revelation reveal about the integrity and effectiveness of our security and our law enforcement structures?
Well, I think the most damning indictment of our security agencies followed the riots in KwaZulu-Natal, I think 2021, let's call them the Zuma riots, after which Professor Sandy Africa from the University of Pretoria brought out a report. And that report just pointed to the incoherence between national intelligence, police, and the National Defence Force, and the lack of coordination in the response by the agencies. Following that and various other commissions of inquiry, there apparently has been some reform, but we are in a situation where very clearly there are still ongoing problems. In that report, Professor Africa indicated that the main challenge, in actual fact, is factionalism within the ANC, and that factionalism was reflected particularly in the intelligence community. And I think that still is the case today. We remember that during the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, there was substantial evidence led to the extent to which the police have been involved through their intelligence funding in the use of their money as a kind of a slush fund to help then President Zuma fight off now President Ramaphosa's challenge. So there's been a long history of problems, and because the security agencies are generally not very transparent, it's very difficult to know where we are today. But I think that the new Commission of Inquiry, let's hope that the recommendations will be implemented and that there will be some transparency and some haste in implementing them.
Right. Now, if Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi had not gone public, would we even have this commission? And doesn't this suggest commissions are reactive rather than proactive transparency tools?
Yeah, they are inevitably reactive. You appoint a commission of inquiry when you know that something's wrong. So it is and it is a good response. I mean, there's in a sense nothing else really that the president can do. He cannot act on allegations because one can argue, of course, if there's evidence, then people should lay a criminal charge. The problem is not in the commissions. The problem is in the political response and reaction to the commissions, because there have been many on very many aspects within South Africa. The problem is that there's apparently no real political will to act upon them. And what pushes back, is what Professor Africa was saying, is that the factionalism within the ANC continues to bubble. And that, of course, is also now evident in what's happening with this Commission of Inquiry, with MK trying to act in defense of the general, and all kinds of factions emerging from the woodwork. And we know that KwaZulu-Natal, of course, politically is in a difficult situation, given the decline in support of the ANC, the rise in support of MK, of course, led by Jacob Zuma. So these factions are really playing off. What we need, the essential problem is that our security agencies, the people that lead them are appointed politically. And we should move to a system where senior appointments, for example, in the police, are done independently, not by the president. because that's really where the problem comes, because the appointments are then used for cadre deployment and to support particular factions within the ANC.
Which brings me to my next point, Jakkie. Now, the Commission will investigate whether national executive members were complicit in these alleged crimes. Can any commission truly investigate the very government that appointed it?
Well, very difficult. I mean, we saw what happened with the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, and a number of those found to have been involved in corruption are now in cabinet. And quite a few are involved in, are members of parliament. So there's a limit, because at a certain level, all law becomes politics. We see that, for example, with what's happening in the United States at the moment. So yes, one has to be very careful in doing this, because it inevitably becomes involved in the proxy infighting, because the ANC, the cake that the ANC has shrunk. And the fighting for that cake at local, provincial, and national level is becoming very intense. Particularly as we head towards the 2017 appointment of a new election of a new leader within the ANC, and then in 2029, election of a new president within the ANC, which will then clearly be not a minority party, but it will no longer be probably the party that we have at the moment, even with 40% support.
Now, President Ramaphosa has put Police Minister Senzo Mchunu on leave immediately. Does this suggest that the president already believes that there's substance to these allegations, or is this just political damage control?
No, I think he had no choice. I think he acted correctly and legally. There's accusations against a minister, a very senior minister, and the correct thing to do for the president is that the minister step aside. What's going to happen in the future is, of course, a different issue. I say again, there are a number of ministers in cabinet and deputy ministers that have been involved and have been alleged to be involved in the corruption that accompanied the Zondo Commission uncovered, and they are still serving in the legislature and the executive. And it's really the bad example that has been set there that is really making people so negative about a commission of inquiry. And I think the commission of inquiry is the correct step by the president.
Now, Jakkie, as a security analyst, when you see allegations of criminal syndicates controlling investigations, manipulating prosecutions, and infiltrating the judiciary, are we looking at state capture of our entire criminal justice system?
So we are still dealing with a legacy of Jacob Zuma, who was a terrible president in terms of the way he used cadre deployment and manipulated the security institutions for his own benefit. And that was laid bare with the Zondo Commission, which indicated the extent to which a variety of things, corruption, but even prior to that, Jacob Zuma had been loading the security agencies, intelligence in particular, with ex-MK cadres that have loyalty to him. We are dealing with those issues.
Back, Jakkie?
Yes, you have. Apologies for that.
No need to apologize. Now, let's look at the timing of this whole thing, right? The timing is quite striking. Now, this comes just as we're seeing mass tavern shootings, construction mafia violence, rising criminality. Could the alleged corruption within law enforcement be directly contributing to South Africa's crime crisis?
I think there's no doubt that high levels of corruption in the security agencies and within the executive play a role. We've heard the allegations by the EFF and others that sort of saying the ANC is just an organized crime syndicate, these kind of issues. You know, there's the saying that the fish rots from the head. The ANC under President Ramaphosa himself has not been implicated. There's been the issues around the cattle farm and so on and so forth, but he himself has not been directly implicated in any of this organized crime business that people are speaking about. Yet we know that in KwaZulu-Natal in particular, the taxi business is deeply, deeply implicated around assassinations, competition for tenders at local government level. And we know that on a very regular basis, local councillors are being killed, being murdered for tender purposes. So to deal with this, we need to first start by cleaning out the security agencies. And this is now where the problems have not come together, because we've had a series of commissions of inquiry, but we don't see transparency in their the way in which they are implemented. But we never come to the core of the problem. The core of the problem essentially is the the way in which the security agencies have been instrumentalized in the factional fighting within the ANC. And to do that, you have to remove them from the ability of the executive, whomever he or she is, to make appointments at a senior level, so that people are appointed on the basis of competence and loyalty to the Constitution and knowledge about their jobs. And that is not the situation at the moment. Unfortunately, across state-owned enterprises and government, the presidency has got significant powers to make appointments. And when we face a contested arena like we do in South Africa, we need to move that to professionalize both the civil service as well as to professionalize the management of state-owned enterprises. And that, I think, really is the heart of the problem. If we look at how South Africa managed to turn the South African revenue services around, we realize that the appointment of a capable, honest and dedicated senior official within the revenue services turned that around. We can turn South Africa's crime situation around. Political leadership is required, but the most important of that is the appointment of capable people to senior positions independently.
And sometimes that requires change, right? So as much as we herald the president to say he made the right move by establishing a commission of inquiry, but was there no other alternative that he could have explored, considering the amount of power that he has?
I think that, of course, the president has considerable leeway and executive powers, but his main preoccupation is unity within the party. And the party, the ANC, is hugely divided. On a daily basis, we hear about fights about its membership of the Government of National Unity, and this faction and that faction. And that's his main preoccupation, I think. And that's where we are in South Africa. I think it is in all our interests to try and find a way to structurally deal with this problem. And as I've said, the most important structural change we can make is to professionalize appointment. This is a recommendation that comes from the 2012 National Development Plan that laid out how we should be looking at senior appointments. But this issue of cadre deployment and the way in which we have done black economic empowerment in South Africa, which I know is a contentious issue, but the way we have done it has not done South Africa well.
All right. So now onto this. On Tuesday, there was a security cluster briefing, and where a minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, mentioned that they have successfully identified and mitigated, the whole coup d'etat matter. And I say, quote unquote, you need to identify it and mitigate against it. And one of the risks is the risk of a coup d'etat. Was there ever a risk?
Not that we know about. In the classic understanding, a coup d'etat is where the military or the security agencies then undertake, assume power. That is just not possible in South Africa or remotely feasible. The military certainly don't have the capabilities. The police are much larger, but they are divided, and they are, they're not they're supposed to be a police service. They are not. No, I think the minister spoke hastily, inadvisedly, and I think she should step back and clarify those comments. I have no intimate knowledge of this, but my interpretation of what she was speaking about is she was pointing to political factions, maybe within the MK and the EFF, that are speaking about overthrowing government. 10 years ago, we would have thought these were right-wing Afrikaans guys standing with a bottle of brandy around a braaivleis. But I think today, the concerns around political stability are much more within the governing party and within the factions that have split away from the governing party, and the infighting within the ANC for what are they going to do with the Government of National Unity and so on. So I think she was referring to that, but it was, I think, a slip, and unfortunately not a good one. That's not what the message that you should be setting out, particularly after the allegations that Trump made about farm murders and all that kind of nonsense.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. But Jakkie, thank you very much for your time.